Hello po sa lahat ng aming mga subscribers. Welcome back to our channel. Texnation po ang pangalan ng channel natin. So, sa mga nakasubscribe na po, maraming salamat. At sa mga susunod po na mga manonood, sana po pag may natutunan kayo sa mga videos ko po, ay mag-subscribe din po kayo. Thank you so much in advance po. So, our video for today will be a comprehensive review of our lessons covering the alphabet sounds in shorthand and its representation. So, lahat po yun isusulat ko sa notebook para mas malinaw po sa lahat ng aking mga students at mga subscribers at aking mga tagapanood. So, thank you so much po. Abangan po natin yan pagkatapos nito. Hello again. So I'll be discussing to you a comprehensive review of our previous lessons 1 to 9. So we start with the alphabet sounds and its representations because many messaged me in my messenger saying that the lesson were delivered too fast. So we start with the sound of A. The sound of A is in shorthand is represented by a big circle. So if this is your A, your representation is this one. So that's A. Circle counterclockwise. That's the A. Then letter E is represented by a small circle. Okay, so there is the E, the small circle, written counterclockwise. Letter T is represented by a short upward slanted stroke. So your letter T now is this one. The direction of writing is upwards. So that is your letter T. Then letter D, as in dog, is represented by a long upward slanted stroke, occupying one whole of the writing line. So if the T is almost 1/2 or shorter, letter D is occupying one whole of the writing line. So the direction of writing is upward. So that's your letter D. Then we have the sound of N. The sound of N is represented by a short straight line. Okay? So your N becomes this one. The direction of writing is going to the right. The counterpart of that is M, which is represented by a longer straight line. So this will now be your M. So again, the direction of writing is going to the right. So that is your M. So take note that the base of the shorthand outline should always be touching the writing line. So, nandyan po siya. Okay? Then, we have the sound of H and ing, which is represented by a dot. A dot. Okay? So, this become, H and ing is represented by this dot. So, yan na po ang H and ing. So, H is always at the beginning of the word, and ing is at the last part, because you include ing in the root word, the last part of the word, as in heading, meeting, leaking, and taking. Yon, those are some examples of words with ing. Then we have the sound of long I, which is represented by a broken circle. So if you remember in my examples in the previous lessons, so that's the broken circle. So this letter E is itlog ng pugo, itlog ng manok, and then long I is basag na balot. Next is the sound of O. O is represented by a tiny underhook. So that is the O, tiny underhook. Okay, then we have R, represented by a short forward undercurve. Okay? So, if this is your R, if that is your R, this is the representation of that in shorthand, undercurve. Then L is represented by a long forward undercurve. So, twice the size of letter R. So, your letter L now becomes this one. So, those are L. Okay? Then we have the counterpart of that. That is the sound of U. U or U, represented by a tiny over hook. So, your U is represented by these outlines. If you notice, this is the counterpart of O. Okay? Then we have K, letter K, is represented by a short forward over curve. So, your K now becomes this one. Sabi ko nga, ito yung asawa ng letter R. And then we have the sound of G, pronounced as gay, is represented by a long forward over curve. So, your gay now becomes this one. So, this is the counterpart of L. Then we have the sound of S, which is represented by a short downward curve. So, your S now is this one. You also call this comma S because it looks like a comma. Others call this right S because it's a right curve. Then we have F, represented by a downward curve. So, your S now is this one. You also call this comma S because it looks like a comma. Others call this right S because it's a right curve. Then we have F, represented by a longer, so this is a longer downward right curve. So this is your F there, written downwards, F. Then we have V as in victory, is represented by a much longer downward right curve because this is occupying the writing line. So your letter V now becomes this one, also written downwards. So those are downwards and downwards direction of writing. So this is now your V. The counterpart of this is called left S. So this is represented by a short downward left curve. So this one becomes now, yan, this is the counterpart of the S. This one is comma S or right S, this one is left S. These are both S, pares po ang S. We do that facilitate the writing of the outlines because there are some outlines where we cannot use the right S because it will look like an U. So you make use of the left S instead. Then we have letter P. The sound of P is represented by a longer, of course longer than S, longer downward left curve. Longer than S, that's what we mean here po. What we mean here is longer than the S. So the representation now of letter P, is this one. So this is the counterpart of F. Okay? Then we have B as in boy is represented by a much longer downward left curve occupying one whole of the writing line. So your letter B now becomes this one. Still written downwards. This is the counterpart of V as in victory. Then we have the sound of SH. SH pronounced as ish, represented by a short downward straight Others make use of a little slanted, a little slanted, dependent on your on your way of writing stroke. So ish now is represented by this one. So it's a little slanted. Others may write it straight, pero it's accepted. Okay? So this is written downwards. This is different from S because this is going down and a little straight and a little slanted, whatever you call that. Then we have the sound of CH pronounced as chay. So this is represented by a longer compared to HA, longer downward, straight or a little slanted stroke. Accepted po yan. So your chay now becomes this one. So that's the ish, you double the size, that becomes the chay, as in church, preach. And we have the sound of J, represented by a much longer, compared to chay, much longer downward, straight, or a little slanted stroke. There you go. So your J becomes this one, going downwards. So that is J. So the next sound that we took up is the sound of TH pronounced as if, which is represented by a short upward over and under curve. So your if now will be represented by this one written upwards and the other one written also upwards. So take note that it is different from letter R because your R is written this way, forward. So if is that very slight difference, but it's different po. So please take note of the difference. Okay, so these are the sounds of the alphabet that we've taken up in lessons 1 to 9. I am supposed to include the brief forms, review of the brief forms, but I decided to create another video on that because we limit the time of the video to more than 10 minutes. So I hope you were reviewed really of the shorthand outlines covering the alphabet sounds from A to the sound of TH.